Here's the obligatory nip and tuck tutorial. I opted to use an image with a background rather than something shot in a studio. That would probably be a bit too easy. This is also an image where it's going to be a bit challenging due to the sideways tilt of the model, and in fact it's the tilt of the hip that's really causing the shape of the model to slump a little bit. So although she's got an amazing figure, it could do with a little bit of stretching, and we have to do it in various sections or portions. And I'm going to throw a lot of different techniques at this, giving you a choice of methods to pick from. I'm going to use the puppet warp, which is new in CS5, but I'll also use the normal warp. And I won't be using liquify, I never do, as it stretches the pixels. I'll be using content-aware fill and see if that works for us. And there will probably be a smart object here and there and some masking. So let's just go for it. So looking at the image here, I'm at the stage now where I've done a little bit of retouching, and I've also done some colours, which I've grouped here. Now, as you can see, I've got masks on these different adjustment layers, and if I then took the background, or the layer 1, which is the retouch layer, and I generated layers from that and tilted them, warped them, etc., then the masks would not follow. So what we're going to do is make sure that our client is happy with the colours and the retouching done so far. And then you can go straight to Image, Duplicate. And we're going to just duplicate the merged layers only and OK that. And now we actually have a flat image, so I'm just going to Command J it. And the first thing I think I'll do here is just straighten it up a little bit, because that will actually help her stand slightly straighter up. I need my ruler, so I'm going to press Command R to get rulers on the sides here. And that means I can pull a guide, and might as well pull another one, although I'll just be doing a straight transform, really, a straight rotate. So Command T to free transform. I'm swiveling that to make the image more or less straight. Now I could pull it out to enlarge it in the corners, but I'm just going to enter that, and I'm going to give the image just a little bit of a crop. We're just cropping the image down to about here. For what we're going to do, the guides are going to be a little bit distracting, so I'm just going to go to View and Clear Guides. Now I'm sure you can see here that that's actually helped her seem a little bit longer, not quite as horizontal, more vertical in shape. Now we're going to split her in two first of all, and I'm going to just take a marquee, rectangular marquee, and just drag it to about the bottom of her bikini top here on the left hand side, and Command J that as well. Now, although I would never stretch the whole figure, I wouldn't want to stretch actually her face and everything else, I will stretch her legs a little bit longer down. So Command T, and then just simply drag that downwards about 103% there. So I'm going to OK that and zoom a little bit further in. It's always important to check the join. So let's just turn off the layer and back on again. Sometimes what I do is Command click on the layer and just press Command H and Command H again, just to toggle that, see if we've got any distortion there. Now this one looks fine, it's just transformed downwards and there's been no shift to the pixels, but I will check it at 100% and do the same thing, Command H and on again. Okay, I can deselect now. And we're going to select another area, which is going to be used to puppet warp it. Now I'm just going to use the pen tool and make myself a new path. So I'm taking the pen tool and making a very generous selection, going all the way down and around the legs and up again there. Because I think I might stretch it a little bit up here, I think I'm going to go right through this area and join it up. You could just as easily make this selection with a lasso tool. I'm just going to make that into a selection and Shift Command C and Command V, and it really helps now that we haven't got any adjustment layers. Now my plan is to use puppet warp, but before I do that, because it's quite tricky, I'm going to use a smart object. that's going to make it a lot easier for me to re-edit this if I'm not completely happy with it. So I'm going to go now to Edit and Puppet Warp, and we get this little network of a grid here, a bit like a spider's web, and we're going to put some holding points on it, some anchor points, so that certain points won't move. Starting with one up here, I'm going to do another one at the top there. I'm going to put a couple of points on the middle where the legs meet, and on the shoes, or on the toes rather, one where the legs cross. And I think I'm going to just put one right here, because I want the thigh to move a little bit inwards, but not so much here on this flat area. So I want to start here by moving it in from the outside. And you may wonder, why did she not cut out the whole thing? Well, the reason for that is really that I want to use the background and just keep that same transition really from the background to the model. I'm going to try and make the edges not go too hard. Unfortunately, one of the things that the Puppet Warp does, it has a tendency to make edges go a little bit hard. I'm going to undo that point, and I'm actually going to press Command H for a moment, and you can see the edge going a little bit hard there. Now what we're going to do is just turn that opacity down to about 50%ish, and you see that's the roundness that we've created there. We're also just going to push it in a little bit, and I'm pushing it in from quite far out there, hoping to get a smoother shape in that way. Puppet Warp can very easily break up into little bumps. Can also pull in a little bit there, but you see the whole leg moving it now, so we're going to push back on the other side. I'm trying to make as few points as possible really. I'm going to take that muscle above the knee and push that in quite a bit. Sometimes you see the image doing a little jig slightly in there as well, and then I'm going to try and pull this leg up to make it a little bit longer, a little bit more elongated, because the other one appears longer. That's just an illusion. Now also we're going to just push in a little bit from the side here and making that a touch smaller, trying not to push it so far that it actually creates the new shape though. I might just push it back ever so slightly there and push the other foot a little bit in and a bit on the ankle, just to slim that ankle down. And I'm not sure about this side. I will just take it a little bit in, and now let's just take the opacity up and see what it looks like. And we might as well just look at the whole image, Command 0. It is tempting to take this in ever so slightly, but I think I'm going to just undo that and keep it a little bit curvy, because after all it is kind of a curvy kind of image, wouldn't you say? So I'm just going to turn my grid back on again, Command H, and OK that. Let's Command 0 to have a look at those edges. Now you see here, this is the trouble with the Puppet Warp, is that it does give those little edges there. It's not completely even. So I might just have to do a bit of work on those. I'm just going to take a lasso tool and just take a little bit from that section, Shift Command C and then Command V. Now what I'm getting is a normal layer, not a smart object. I'm just going to swivel that around, transform it a little bit, place it on the edge there, and then if I needed to I could actually use the warp button there, and in this case it doesn't look as if I need to, so I can just enter that, and then I would have to match the color. I can just do a direct adjustment on it now, so I'm going to just Command click there and just make that a little bit darker. It's going to affect the background slightly differently, so actually what I'm going to do is match it to the background, darken the edge a little bit. If I alt click here, I can just use that edge and I mask the whole thing off, and I'm just going to bring that back in here. I need to reposition it slightly. That takes care of that little bump. Now as you can see here, I've got a little bit of a join, so I can mask my smart object. I can just go back to layer 3, which is the legs, and put a mask on it. Use the brush tool at 100% opacity and flow, using black, and just making sure that I find a point where it's kind of natural to mask it out. And of course here there's a smooth transition. Now let's look at this one. Okay, here I'm just going to take it a little bit back. So I'm going to X my swatch there and just make sure that I bring this back in fully. It all makes sense. Okay, and let's see what we've done combined with that. That has quite a lot of impact, but we still have a shape that doesn't quite make sense. We also need to check our mask all around, just checking if this has any edges that we need to get rid of. So Command click on the actual layer or the smart object. I'm doing my Command H check and moving downwards here, probably not a problem in the background, but here you can actually see that I've got a misjoin there, so X. Sometimes it's a case of actually having to really rebuild it a little bit there. Here we have a mismatch, so you can see there that we might have to rebuild a little bit. Just make myself a new layer above there. Might as well just do it straight away. Using current and blow, we just clone that over, going all over there, and I'm just going to erase that. Okay, going back to our legs mask. That should be fine. I also notice an area here that's very flat. So while we're at it, we can just warp that a little bit using the puppet warp there as well. So I'm going to just go to layer 5, make a lasso there, and I think I'm going to just make a little shape like this here. Shift Command C, Command V, and I'm not going to bother making that into a smart object. I'm just going to go straight to the puppet warp there. I'm going to put my anchor point at the top and at the bottom, and one in there, and really have to press Command H here to see what I'm doing. I think the point would be to make that a little bit more shapely there, tucking in the waist and making it just a little bit more shapely there. I'm noticing that it's going a little bit in here where I've actually anchored it. So I'm just going to zoom in to see what that is. Bringing that just a touch back there and maybe a little bit down to match it to those strings. Maybe backtrack a touch there. I'm going to press Command H so that next time I come into this puppet warp that I actually see the grid here, and enter that. I'm going to really do what I always do on these little transforms, is to Alt and click on the mask just to remove the whole thing, brush it in. So I'm using it really more on the edge, on the silhouette. I think when it comes to these ribs here, there might be some shading needed. I'm just going to X that and just bring back a bit of the original right there, and a little bit of cloning there perhaps. And I can just bring up layer 5 and just get that edge there while we see it. It's so easy to forget. It's good to make a mental note, but if you have too many mental notes, you just go mental. I'm now going to use warp on this area of the thighs, taking a lasso, lassoing mostly for the right leg as we see it. I'm going to highlight layer 6 and Shift Command C and Command V. The reason why I didn't want to highlight layer 5 is that this is starting to become an extras layer when I'm doing cloning, and I'm going to go now to Edit and Transform Warp. And on this one, I'm just going to warp that a little bit to the side, and that means that the left leg, yes, does go a little bit bigger, but you get the balance between the two legs. And this is probably going to swing a little bit into an S, so that means I have to work it a bit back and forth here, just making that a bit straighter. I can take the opacity down to see whether I've gone too far. That should be enough, and taking that back up again and pressing enter. Because I've done a swing like an S shape, you can see a little bit of mismatch here, but that's going to be okay because I'm going to mask it out and back in again. So Alt click on the mask and use the brush tool at 100%, and I'm going to press X to get a white brush and start from the top there, using in fact a bigger brush, and then I'm just going to mask those edges out a little bit. It's a bit back and forth, but it works for me. Pressing X again, it lets me match it with the shadows, bring it in as much as I like, and then focus a little bit more on that problem area there. I'm gonna match it in using a smaller brush there, harder brush as the brush goes smaller, just to align that, and that also helps with the shape. So let's have a look at that at full view and zooming slightly in again. Now if I'm going to elongate the torso upwards, I'm going to end up coming into conflict with various elements of the image here. So we've done the easy bit really, we've worked against this blue-grey background, but here it gets a little bit more tricky. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a path, and as you can see here, I'm just making a path on the outline, precisely on the outline, and I'm going to use this later on. Before we actually use the path to cut her out and to extend her torso upwards, we're also going to use a content aware fill, and on this fill hopefully it will be able to compute what the background is meant to look like without the model on it. That'll be interesting. If you don't have content aware fill and you're not in CS5, or if we don't get the content aware fill to actually do the job here, and I've noticed it very often fails on a lot of images, it just doesn't get it. So if that fails, we're going to have to recreate the background using a little bit of cloning, and I'm going to complete the path and come back to you when I've done that. So here's my completed path for the upper part of the torso, and I did actually make a couple of holes in that path because I think we're going to move the whole face a little bit further up there. I've also created another path, just a very rough one, around the model, and this one we're going to load in a moment when we've created a new layer. So I'm going to just write extras on this one because this was our cloning layer. And then we're going to make a new layer just below that, and I'm going to merge everything that's visible into that layer, and we don't have to think about any adjustments layers because there's no color going on here as separate layers. Now we can command click on our path 2, or you could make just a lasso selection for this, and on this one we're really going to put Photoshop a little bit to the challenge and try and remove the whole model. So we're going to go to edit fill and use content aware fill, and let's see how that copes. Now this is obviously a bit processor intensive because the computer is computing after all. Now let's see how it removes the model, and hopefully it doesn't make a dog's dinner out of it. Now this doesn't have to be perfect, and strictly speaking we don't actually have to use the bottom part of it at all. It's just easier probably for Photoshop to work it out that I want to remove the whole model. There we are. We did get a bit more than we bargained for, but if I deselect it, I can just erase the bits that really bother me at the bottom. We're not going to use the bottom anyway, so we can just bring her legs back there. And then going further up here, we're just going to have to reconstruct a little bit. And you can see here, typically it's kind of created these fields here, so we're going to just have to work a little bit on that and just even those out if we do use it. So instead of doing lots of work on it before I do the transformations, I'm just going to do that little bit up there and leave the rest for later in case we need it. You're going to use very small parts of this new background anyway, so I'm just going to take a stamp tool and just repair these things. So if you weren't working with a content aware fill, this is what you might have to do, or patch it, use some grafts perhaps, just to recreate this background. So I'm not making it completely perfect here. I can do that later if I use it. I'm going to turn off this for a moment, and we're going to shift up that upper torso. So command clicking on the upper torso path, and we need to modify that selection just a touch. So select and modify, and first I'll go for expand. I'm just going to expand it 1 pixel there. Select and modify and feather. So I'm going to feather it just 1 pixel as well. What we really should be doing is looking at this in quick mask or using the refine edge. But as long as I have a slight blue or a colour around those edges, I'm quite happy with that. And as you can see there, I've included my shadow there as well. So turning off the quick mask again, and Shift Command C and Command V to copy and paste merged. And we can then turn the layer 8 back on again. Let's just create a mask without black, just a white mask, and just roughly mask out the rest of it. You remember that we erased the bottom bit. Now I am going to do some more work on this hip here, but for now what we're going to try and do is just stretch the torso. I'm going to now use the move tool and just shift that upper part of the torso upwards a little bit. I'm going to remember how much I've moved it as well, so I'm holding down the shift key and the up key. So a little bit there, a little bit more, and I'm going to have to transform the other part of the torso to connect with it as well. So I think 3 little ups there. For a little bit more transform, I'm now also going to make that into a smart object. That means that if I get it wrong, I can always bring it back. Instead of bringing it all the way back, I can make some small adjustments to it. So edit, transform and warp. I'm going to try and lift the shoulder up a little bit, stretching that torso even more. I'm going to also try and lift the arm up a little bit. That does lift the face up as well, so we've got to be careful with that. So try and compensate a bit there. That elongates her neck too. Now you see it bulges out a little bit there, so we're going to just bring it in and a bit up there. The great thing about normal warp is that it doesn't give those lumps and bumps that the puppet warp does. I'm going to pull up that arm even just a little bit more there. Now if I look in this square here at the top, I get an idea of how much I've distorted it as well. So I can see that if I pull that a little bit up there, trying to make this square, top left square here, as a square as possible really, not to distort the face too much. I can then also reposition it slightly down there. I'm going to try entering that, and we're going to just have to turn off both the layers there together. And you can see there that she's now quite a bit taller. And then we have the slightly tricky task here of joining that torso with the top there. So let's just get an overview, and we're going to have to now select this part. So for the moment here, I'm just going to turn off both of those layers, and remembering that we're kind of done with the legs there, and we're going to bring that up to about here. Shift Command C, Command V to paste. Let's just turn on these layers again. Again, I think I'm going to use a smart object, and this time press Command T, and I'm going to warp it, but I'm just going to lift it up a little bit first, and then use the warp button there. Zoom in a bit more, and use that warp to get the placement. And remembering to look at this area. Now, this was going to be transformed down a little bit anyway, so I'm going to do that now and try and match that there. And then it shifts at the top, so we're going to just keep on shifting up and down until we've got it just right. Sometimes if you push it in one direction, it'll shift in the other. But the great thing is that if you don't touch these edges around here, then usually it should stay more or less aligned to whatever it butts up against. That looks fine against the clasp on the hip. Zooming in a bit there just to look at the joins here. They're not too bad either. So I'm just going to enter that. Command 0, and let's have a look. Turning that off and back on again there. Now it's just a matter of masking. We're going to highlight the top layer, the extras, and not the bottom layer but the layer 2, Command G. So I'm just going to look at that before and after. Now I'm just going to do a little bit more work here on the hip and go just below the extras and make a selection there of that hip, and maybe just add in a little bit there. And we're going to go back to our puppet warp, so Shift Command C and Command V, move right in there, actually zooming a little bit out, so that's 50% view. So go to Edit and puppet warp there again. And I don't think this area should move, nor do I really think that this should move. This band or this strap here shouldn't really be moving either, and nor should the clasp. What I'm just going to do here is just shift that a little bit down, try and go in between here and just flatten that slight bulge there. See if I can do that there as well, and Command H to see what it looks like. Now obviously it's kind of shifted itself out there, but I don't care, that's going to be masked away. So I'm just going to place these back in and make sure that everything is joined up there, placing that one as well. I'm just going to Command H and then enter that, or click my mask, and that's masked it all away, and brushing it in and just checking at 100% whether there are any bad transitions there, and it looks pretty good. And looking at the full figure, that's pretty rounded there. I still think actually we can take the leg in a little bit more. Because the puppet warp was done on a smart object, it's now turned into a smart filter. If you look here in the layers, double click on that to open that up again and see if we can just take that a little further. And remembering that we've got this little layer sitting above it, so we're going to have to reposition that. I think that's it, so I'm just going to Command H and then enter that. And I'm just going to take the move tool and use the keyboard arrow to just shift that into position again. And there we have the edge. The edge is a little bit hard, and that's caused by the puppet warp, but we're just going to have to live with that. The layer that I think probably needed the most masking was actually the background. So what I'm going to do is actually just fill the background completely. It's easier to do it that way. I'm then going to just start going with the brush around the edge. Also, this gives you a good idea of how much you've actually removed and transformed. At the top there's no problem, but as you can see, the hand would have posed a problem if we didn't have that background there. And inside here and inside here. And then go, well, the arm has gone upwards, so that hasn't been a problem, and certainly we didn't really want any of that background. Let's have a look at this. Command Z, and it's dealt okay with that area around there. So in fact, I don't think we're going to have to do a lot of work here. We're just going to have to be a little bit careful with those strange edges it created around here. So try not to use too much of that background, really. I could go further, and there is some work to be done here, but I think you've seen most of it and you know what I'm going to do there. I'm just going to go on the extras and just take the healing brush. I'm going to just set it to current and below, and that's going to be dealing with those little breakups right there. So let's come back to the image now that I've tied up a few loose ends. I've renamed the layers just so I know what they are, and you see here the before and after. And this is after I've also done a little bit of masking and checking on all the edges and all the transitions, just to make sure that there's nothing overlapping and no telltale signs of these transformations that we've done here.